For 3 years, the most dangerous man in Chicago walked into a tiny floral shop every Thursday at exactly 4 p.m. He never missed a single day, until a rainy afternoon in October. The silence that followed didn't just break a routine, it unleashed a city-wide bloodbath. Diana Higgins knew she wasn't the kind of woman men went to war for. At 240 pounds, she was built for comfort, not for the cover of a fashion magazine. She had soft, thick arms, a wide, generous waist, and a round face framed by unruly, frizzy auburn curls. She loved her body and unapologetically loved the space she took up in the world, but she also understood how the gritty, fast-paced city of Chicago viewed her. To most, she was completely invisible. She was just the quiet, fat florist who owned Petals and Stems, an unassuming brick-and-mortar shop nestled in the rougher outskirts of the South Side. Her world was a quiet sanctuary of damp earth, bruised petals, and the sharp green scent of cut stems. Diana wore faded denim overalls and soil-smudged aprons, her hands permanently calloused from pruning shears. She was content. She asked for nothing more than her plants and her peace. Then came Alessandro. Alessandro Russo was a man who brought the temperature of a room down 10 degrees the moment his expensive hand-stitched leather shoes crossed the threshold. He was the undisputed head of the Russo syndicate, a man whose name was whispered in back alleys and police precincts alike. He was all sharp angles, bruised knuckles, and tailored Italian wool. A jagged pale scar cut through his left eyebrow, a permanent reminder of the violent underworld he ruled. The first time he walked into Petals and Stems, Diana had accidentally dropped a terracotta pot. It shattered loudly against the linoleum, but Alessandro hadn't even flinched. He had simply walked up to the counter, his dark eyes locking onto her wide, terrified green ones. He didn't look at her the way other men did. He didn't look past her, nor did he look at her with the cruel, dismissive pity she had encountered in her youth. He looked at her like she was the only anchor in a turbulent sea. "White lilies," he had murmured. His voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder over the lake. "A half-dozen." Diana, her hands trembling, had wrapped the pristine white flowers in brown butcher paper. He had dropped a crisp $100 bill onto the counter, refused the change, and walked out to a waiting black town car flanked by 2 massive men in dark suits. That was 3 years ago. Since that day, a silent, unshakable routine had formed. Every Thursday, at precisely 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the black town car would idle at the curb. The bodyguards would step out, scanning the street, and Alessandro would enter the shop. Sometimes he wore a charcoal suit. Sometimes his knuckles were split and bleeding, hidden poorly in his pockets. But he always came. Over the years, the terror Diana initially felt melted into a strange, unspoken intimacy. They rarely exchanged more than a dozen words. "Good afternoon, Diana." "Your lilies, Mr. Russo." But the silence between them was thick, electric, and heavy with words they could not say. Diana noticed the way his shoulders relaxed the moment the shop bell chimed. Alessandro noticed the way Diana's full cheeks flushed pink when he held her gaze for just a second too long. He never treated her like an afterthought. When he took the flowers from her, his large, rough fingers would intentionally brush against her plump, soft hands, leaving a trail of fire in their wake. Diana often wondered who the lilies were for. A dead wife? A mother's grave? A secret lover? She convinced herself it was the latter. Why would a wealthy, powerful, dangerously handsome Mafia boss have any interest in a heavy-set florist who constantly smelled of fertilizer and chamomile. But she lived for Thursdays. She began wearing her nicer sweaters on Thursdays. She made sure the glass counter was spotless. Then came the second Thursday of October. The sky over Chicago was a bruised, violent purple, dumping freezing rain onto the pavement. Diana stood behind the counter, a cup of lukewarm tea in her hands, her eyes darting to the grandfather clock in the corner. 3:55 p.m. She adjusted the bundle of white lilies she had hand-selected that morning. They were perfect. 4 p.m. The street outside remained empty. The rain lashed against the storefront window. 4:15 p.m. Diana frowned, stepping out from behind the counter. She wiped her hands on her apron. Traffic, she told herself. The weather is terrible. 5 p.m. The sky turned pitch black. The streetlights flickered on, casting long, distorted shadows across the wet asphalt. No black town car. No bodyguards. No Alessandro. A cold, heavy knot formed in Diana's stomach. Alessandro Russo was a man of lethal precision. He did not run late, and he certainly did not forget. For 3 years he had braved blizzards, heat waves, and gang wars to walk through her door at exactly 4 o'clock. By 7 p.m., Diana flipped the open sign to closed. She locked the heavy deadbolts, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She took the white lilies, placed them gently into a bucket of water in the back room, and sat in the dark. He didn't come. And in the dangerous world of Alessandro Russo, a broken routine usually meant only one thing. Someone was dead. Diana barely slept that night. She tossed and turned in the small apartment above the shop, listening to the wailing sirens that seemed to echo through the city with more frequency than usual. Every shadow looked like a hitman. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a boot step. When Friday morning broke, grey and miserable, Diana trudged downstairs to open the shop. She felt utterly foolish for her anxiety. He is a mob boss, she chided herself as she swept the floor. You are the florist. You are nothing to him but a transaction. At 9:30 a.m., the shop bell chimed violently. Diana spun around, a welcoming smile forced onto her lips. But the smile died instantly. It wasn't Alessandro. It was Eric Costello. Diana recognized him immediately. He was Alessandro's right-hand man, the younger, fiercely loyal enforcer who usually stood guard by the town car. But Eric was not standing guard today. He stumbled through the door, knocking over a display of ferns. He was clutching his side, his trench coat soaked in a terrifying mixture of rainwater and dark arterial blood. "Lock the door!" Eric gasped, collapsing against the wooden counter, leaving a smeared red handprint on the glass. Diana froze for a fraction of a second before her survival instincts kicked in. Her heavy body moved with surprising speed. She rushed to the door, slammed the deadbolts into place, and pulled down the thick green window blinds. She ran back to Eric, grabbing a clean towel from under the counter and pressing it hard against his bleeding side. "Eric, my God, I need to call an ambulance," Diana said, her voice shaking as she pulled her phone from her pocket. Eric's bloody hand shot out, gripping her thick wrist with an iron strength. "No cops, no hospitals. Listen to me, Diana. You have to leave. Now!" "What? Why?" Diana's heart hammered in her throat. "Where is Mr. Russo?" Eric coughed, a wet, rattling sound. "Alessandro. It was an ambush. The Moretti family. Anthony Moretti found out." "Found out about what?" Diana cried, applying more pressure to his wound. "I don't know anything about your business. I just sell flowers." Eric looked up at her, his dark eyes swimming with pain and a strange, desperate pity. "You really don't know, do you?" Diana, he didn't care about the flowers. Diana felt the breath knock out of her lungs. "What are you talking about?" "The lilies," Eric winced. He threw them in the dumpster 3 blocks away every single Thursday, for 3 years. Diana stared at him, the world tilting slightly on its axis. Why would he? Why? "Because of you," Eric grunted, leaning his head back against the counter. "Alessandro bought this whole city block a year ago, through a shell company, just to make sure your rent wouldn't go up. He put 2 of our men on the payroll just to watch your shop from the diner across the street. You're the only thing in his life that is soft, the only thing that is real. And Moretti found out." Diana stumbled back, her hands covered in Eric's blood. Her mind spun wildly. Alessandro, buying a block for her? Throwing away the flowers? The handsome, terrifying Mafia boss had built a fortress around a fat, invisible florist just so he could watch her smile once a week? It didn't make sense. It defied every rule of the cruel world she lived in. "Moretti hit us yesterday at 3:30, Eric continued, his voice growing weaker. "Alessandro was on his way here. He took 2 bullets. We barely got him out. But Moretti's men are tearing the south side apart, looking for him. And worse, they're looking for you. They know Alessandro comes here. They know you are his weakness." A heavy silence fell over the flower shop, broken only by the sound of rain hitting the roof. Diana looked at her hands, then at the blood-stained counter, and finally at the bucket of white lilies in the back room. She had spent her entire life trying not to take up too much space, trying to be invisible so the world wouldn't hurt her. But the most dangerous man in the city had seen her. He had protected her. And now he was bleeding out somewhere because he was trying to get to her. Diana Higgins took a deep breath, her broad chest rising, a sudden fierce fire igniting in her belly. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice dropping its tremble. Eric blinked, surprised by the sudden steel in the soft woman's tone. "An old warehouse, down by the shipping yards, Pier 47. "Can you walk?" she asked. "Barely." "Then you're going to lean on me," Diana said, grabbing her heavy winter coat and her keys. "My delivery van is in the back alley. They won't look for a floral van." Diana helped Eric up. He was a large man, but Diana was strong. Her thick frame supported his weight easily as she half carried, half dragged him out the back door and into the biting cold rain. She shoved him into the passenger seat of her beaten-up Ford Transit van, slamming the door shut. As she climbed into the driver's seat and jammed the key into the ignition, she checked the rear-view mirror. A sleek silver Mercedes was pulling up to the front of her shop. 3 men in leather jackets stepped out, one of them carrying a crowbar. Diana slammed her foot on the gas. The van roared to life, tearing down the alleyway, just as the glass of her storefront shattered in the distance. The drive to Pier 47 was a blur of adrenaline and rain-slicked roads. Diana took the back alleys, utilizing her intimate knowledge of the city's floral delivery routes to avoid main streets. Next to her, Eric was fading fast. They reached the shipping yards, a desolate, rusting graveyard of shipping containers and abandoned factories. Diana drove the van into the cavernous entrance of Warehouse 47, killing the headlights. The silence inside was heavy. Diana helped Eric out of the van, the metallic echo of their footsteps sounding like gunshots in the vast space. "Dom?" Eric croaked out. From the shadows, a figure emerged. Diana gasped. Alessandro Russo was leaning heavily against a steel pillar, an assault rifle gripped loosely in his right hand. His bespoke suit was ruined. His white shirt stained a deep, terrifying crimson across his abdomen and shoulder. He looked pale, deathly ill. But when his dark eyes locked onto Diana, a shockwave of raw emotion crossed his usually stoic face. "Diana," he breathed, his voice rougher than usual. He dropped the rifle, taking a stumbling step toward her. "What is she doing here, Eric? I told you to get her out of the city." "Moretti's men were already at the shop, boss," Eric groaned, sinking onto a wooden crate. "She got me out." Alessandro looked at Diana, his eyes scanning her face, her messy curls, the blood on her apron. He reached out, his rough, cold fingers gently cupping her round cheek. It was the most intimate contact they had ever shared. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered, his thumb brushing over her skin. "I tried to keep you out of this. I tried to just be the man who buys flowers." Diana leaned her face into his palm, her heart aching at the sight of his wounds. "You missed our Thursday, Alessandro." A weak, genuine smile broke through his pain. "I'm sorry, mia cara. I was a little tied up." Before Diana could respond, the screech of tires echoed from outside the warehouse. Headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the dust motes in the air. Car doors slammed. Voices echoed. Anthony Moretti had found them. Alessandro's smile vanished. The ruthless Mafia boss returned in an instant. He pulled Diana behind his broad body, ignoring the agony of his wounds as he reached down to pick up his rifle. "Stay behind me," Alessandro ordered, his voice cold as ice. "No matter what happens, Diana, you stay behind me." The headlights of 4 separate SUVs cut through the gloom of the warehouse, throwing long, monstrous shadows against the corrugated steel walls. The heavy doors slammed shut with a metallic finality, trapping them inside. Diana's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She stood behind Alessandro, her hands gripping the thick wool of his ruined suit jacket. Despite the blood loss, Alessandro's stance was wound and unyielding, a human shield built entirely for her protection. Footsteps echoed across the concrete. A dozen men fanned out, their weapons drawn. From the center of the formation walked Anthony Moretti. He was a lean, sharp-featured man who wore his cruelty like a tailored coat. He puffed casually on a cigar, the cherry glowing bright orange in the dim light. "Well, well, well," Moretti's voice echoed, dripping with false sympathy. "Look at the great Alessandro Russo, reduced to hiding in a rusted-out shipping yard with a crippled dog and a—" Moretti's cold eyes slid over Alessandro's shoulder, landing on Diana. A nasty, mocking grin spread across his face. "And a baker? A cleaning lady? Tell me, Dom, is this the great weakness my men have been tearing the city apart to find? She's certainly big enough to hide behind." The men behind Moretti chuckled. A hot flush of deep-seated shame burned Diana's cheeks, a reflex from a lifetime of cruel comments. But before she could shrink back into herself, Alessandro reached his left hand behind his back and intertwined his rough fingers with hers, squeezing tightly. "If you look at her again, Anthony, I'll pluck your eyes from your skull," Alessandro said, his voice a deadly, quiet rasp that carried perfectly across the warehouse floor. Moretti laughed, though it sounded brittle. "Big words for a dead man. You've gotten sloppy, Dom? You thought you could run this city and play house in the slums. Did you really think Alderman James Fitzpatrick was loyal to you? The man loves money more than his constituents. You paid him to keep the zoning laws strict around her little flower shop, didn't you? But when I offered him double to hand over your Thursday itinerary, the good alderman sang like a choir boy." Diana gasped. Alderman Fitzpatrick was a staple of Chicago politics, a man who smiled on local television and cut ribbons at community centers. The realization that the city's highest levels of power were corrupted, and that Alessandro had manipulated them solely to protect her tiny slice of the world, was staggering. "Fitzpatrick is a dead man walking," Alessandro said evenly. "And so are you." "Kill them," Moretti spat, dropping his cigar and crushing it beneath his heel. "Leave the fat girl for last. I want him to watch." The warehouse erupted into deafening violence. Alessandro shoved Diana hard behind a stack of solid steel shipping crates, just as a hail of bullets shredded the space they had occupied a second before. He leaned around the corner, firing his assault rifle with terrifying precision. Two of Moretti's men dropped instantly, their bodies hitting the concrete with a heavy thud. Eric, despite his wounds, had managed to draw his sidearm, providing cover fire from behind a wooden pallet. But they were pinned down, outgunned, and both men were bleeding out. Diana crouched behind the crates, her hands clamped over her ears, her chest heaving. The smell of cordite and copper filled the air. She watched Alessandro reload with one hand, his face pale and slick with sweat. He was breathing in shallow, ragged gasps. He couldn't hold them off forever. If they stayed here, Alessandro would die. Eric would die. And then Moretti would come for her. She looked around the dim space, her eyes landing on her beat-up Ford Transit van, idling silently 20 yards away in the shadows. The keys were still in the ignition. Diana didn't think. She didn't let the lifelong narrative of being slow, heavy, and helpless stop her. She moved, crawling on her hands and knees, keeping her body low behind the scattered machinery and crates. She scrambled toward the van. Bullets sparked against the metal around her, raining rust and dust onto her unruly auburn hair. "Diana, no!" Alessandro roared over the gunfire, his voice cracking with genuine terror when he saw her break cover. She ignored him, throwing her heavy frame through the open driver's side door of the van. She slammed the door shut, shifting the gear into drive. She didn't know how to shoot a gun, but she knew how to drive a 3-ton delivery vehicle in Chicago winter traffic. Diana slammed her foot onto the accelerator. The Ford Transit roared, the engine screaming as the heavy tires spun on the dusty concrete before catching traction. She flipped the high beams on, blinding the cluster of Moretti's men who were advancing on Alessandro's position. Before they could adjust their aim, Diana plowed the van directly into their line. The heavy steel bumper of the transit van smashed into Moretti's men, throwing 3 of them into the air like rag dolls. She didn't stop. She drove the van straight into the side of Moretti's sleek, armored SUV, pinning 2 more gunmen between the crushed metal. The impact threw Diana forward, the seatbelt bruising her collarbone, but the airbag miraculously didn't deploy. The sudden, brutal chaos broke Moretti's offensive line. Alessandro didn't waste the opening. He stepped out from behind the crates, his rifle raised. He fired 3 single, calculated shots. Moretti, who had been thrown to the ground by the van's impact, jerked violently as 2 rounds took him in the chest, and the 3rd in the center of his forehead. The remaining 3 men, seeing their boss dead and their numbers decimated by a florist in a delivery van, dropped their weapons and ran for the open loading bay doors, disappearing into the rainy night. Silence fell over the warehouse, save for the hissing radiator of Diana's wrecked van. Diana kicked her door open, stumbling out onto the concrete. Her knees gave way, and she collapsed, gasping for air. Before she could hit the ground, a pair of strong, bloody arms caught her. Alessandro fell to his knees with her, pulling her heavy body into his chest. He buried his face in her messy curls, his large frame shaking. He wasn't the ruthless boss of the Chicago underworld in that moment. He was just a man who had almost lost the only thing he loved. "You crazy, beautiful woman," he breathed against her neck, his voice thick with raw emotion. "You could have been killed." "I had to," Diana sobbed, wrapping her thick arms around his broad, bleeding shoulders. "I wasn't going to let them take my Thursday." A wet, choked laugh escaped Alessandro's lips. He pulled back, ignoring the blood soaking his shirt, and crashed his lips against hers. It was a desperate, bruising kiss, tasting of copper, rain, and absolute devotion. Diana melted into him, all her insecurities dissolving in the heat of his touch. "Dom?" Eric groaned from across the floor, interrupting the moment. "As touching as this is, I am actively dying over here." Alessandro broke the kiss, resting his forehead against Diana's. "Let's go home, Diana. Let's go home." Home was not the cramped apartment above petals and stems. Home was a sprawling, heavily fortified stone estate, hidden deep in the forested hills of Lake Forest, miles away from the city. The next 3 days were a blur of medical machinery, hushed whispers, and the sterile smell of antiseptics. Alessandro's private underground doctor, a discreet man named Dr. Harrison, had performed surgery on both Alessandro and Eric on the estate's dining room table. Diana hadn't left Alessandro's side. She slept in a plush velvet armchair next to his massive 4-poster bed, washing his feverish skin with cool cloths and holding his hand when the pain medication wore off. In the quiet hours, Diana's old demons returned. Surrounded by the opulent, multi-million-dollar estate, with its priceless art and silk draperies, she felt incredibly out of place. She looked down at her wide thighs, her soft stomach, her calloused, unmanicured hands. She was a simple, heavy-set florist from the South Side. Now that the adrenaline had faded, surely Alessandro would realize the mismatch. He belonged in a world of sleek, statuesque women who wore designer gowns, not a woman who lived in denim overalls and smelled of potting soil. On the 4th night, the fever broke. Diana was dozing in the chair when she felt a weak tug on her hand. She snapped awake. Alessandro's dark eyes were open, clear, and fixed entirely on her. "You look exhausted," he whispered, his voice raspy. "You got shot twice. I don't think you get to criticize my appearance," Diana retorted softly, though a relieved smile broke across her face. She poured a glass of water, gently helping him lift his head to take a sip. "I'm not criticizing," Alessandro said, leaning back against the pillows. He reached out, his knuckles brushing against the soft curve of her waist, where it rested against the bed frame. "I'm admiring." Diana looked away, her cheeks burning. "Alessandro, you don't have to pretend. Now that you're safe, I can go back to the shop. You can send your men. I won't tell anyone about this place." Alessandro's jaw tightened. The air in the room suddenly grew heavy. He shifted, wincing in pain, but forced himself to sit up, ignoring her protests. He gripped her chin, forcing her to look at him. "Do you know why I walked into your shop 3 years ago?" he asked, his dark eyes intense, stripping away every defense she had. Diana swallowed hard. "To buy lilies?" "No," Alessandro said softly. "I walked in because a week before that, I was sitting in my car, parked across the street. I was watching my men beat a debtor half to death in the alley. It was ugly. It was ruthless, and I felt absolutely nothing. I was empty, Diana. I was a monster in a suit. His thumb traced the line of her jaw. And then I looked across the street, through the window of your shop. I saw you. You were potting a sunflower. You were singing to it. And when a stray cat walked in, you stopped everything, got down on your knees, and fed it from your own lunch. I watched you for an hour. You were so full of life, so vibrant, so incredibly soft in a world that is nothing but hard edges. I walked into your shop the next week just to see if you were real. Tears welled in Diana's green eyes, spilling over her thick lashes. I don't care about the women in my world, Alessandro continued, his voice fierce and unwavering. They are sharp, cold, and calculated. I want you, Diana. I want your warmth. I want your kindness. I love every inch of you. I bought that city block to protect you. But I bought this house to share with you. If you'll have me. Diana looked at the terrifying Mafia boss, seeing the absolute vulnerability in his eyes. He wasn't lying. He didn't see her weight as a flaw. He saw her as a sanctuary. She leaned forward, burying her face in the crook of his uninjured neck, her tears soaking his collar. "I'll have you," she whispered. "I'll have you every day of the week, not just Thursdays." Alessandro's arms wrapped around her big, soft body, holding her as if she were the most precious, delicate thing in the universe. 6 months later, the city of Chicago had changed. The Moretti Syndicate had been systematically dismantled in a matter of weeks by a recovered, furious Alessandro Russo. Alderman James Fitzpatrick was found floating face down in the Chicago River, a tragic, unsolved boating accident that made the evening news for a week before fading into obscurity. The streets were quiet. The Russo family's grip on the city was absolute and undisputed. But on the south side, on a quiet, unremarkable street, petals and stems remained largely the same. The broken window had been replaced, the linoleum floors polished, and the inventory doubled. The shop bell chimed cheerfully. It was Thursday. 4 p.m. Diana stood behind the counter, wearing a beautiful emerald green wrap dress that hugged her generous curves perfectly, her auburn curls pinned up elegantly. She smiled as the black town car idled at the curb. The door opened, and Alessandro walked in. He wore a sharp, navy Italian suit, his dark eyes instantly locking onto hers, filled with a warmth reserved only for her. He didn't stop at the other side of the counter. He walked around it, wrapping his arms around her waist, and kissed her deeply, right in the middle of the shop. "Good afternoon, Mr. Russo," Diana teased, breathless as he pulled away. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Russo," Alessandro murmured, a rare, genuine smile gracing his scarred face. He glanced at the bucket of fresh white lilies sitting on the back counter. "I think we can finally stop pretending I like lilies." Diana laughed, a rich, full sound that filled the shop. "I ordered sunflowers this week for the estate." Alessandro kissed her forehead, resting his hand over her heart. "Perfect. Let's go home." Did this gripping story of Diana and Alessandro keep you on the edge of your seat? True love doesn't care about the size of your waist or the dangers of your past. It cares about the size of your heart and the courage to protect it. If you loved this intense Mafia romance, hit that like button, share this video with your fellow romance lovers, and subscribe for more breathtaking stories. What was your favorite twist? Let us know.